Today, for these moments that we have to share together, I want to talk with you from the subject, peace under pressure. Peace under pressure. We're going to talk about how to have peace under pressure. For somebody, this is going to be $10,000 worth of therapy right here today from the Apostle Paul. Just lay down on the couch today. He's going to cure some of what ails you. Let's pray together as we begin. Father, I thank you this morning that somebody's going to be free. Lord, that you're going to deliver somebody from anxiety, from fear, from worry this morning. Lord, that somebody's going to go out with peace that can withstand pressure. Lord, as your word is preached, would you align our worlds with your kingdom? Form our character to align with that of your Son. Take my lips and speak through them. Take our minds, think with them. Take our hearts, set them on fire with love for you. It's in Christ's name we ask it. Everybody said. Well, as many of you have, I have followed this week the drama of the missing submersible vessel Titan. Last Sunday morning, the Titan with its 5-person crew disappeared into the depths of the North Atlantic in an attempt to see the wreckage of the Titanic, which lay some 2 miles down. And all this week, as the news stations breathlessly kept a countdown of the number of hours of oxygen they had left, we all imagined the grim reality and irony of those 5 men lost in the depths of the ocean, just like the ship that they had gone to see. But the reality of the situation, while no less tragic, was quite different than what we had imagined. We had imagined all week them slowly running out of oxygen, but the reality was sudden and catastrophic loss. Now, there's going to be investigations as into the precise reasons, but the sad fact is that at some unknown depth, the Titan submersible simply could not withstand the pressure and imploded. And as I read these stories this week and kept up with this and what had transpired, that submersible began to preach to me. See, the problem wasn't with the pressure. The problem wasn't the pressure. The pressure was predictable. Down at the depth of the Titanic, it's known that the water pressure at that depth is roughly 6,000 pounds per square inch. The problem wasn't the pressure. The pressure was predictable. The problem was with the vessel. See, under that amount of pressure, even the slightest structural flaw in the vessel could prove fatal, could have tragic consequences. Now, none of those men would have gotten on board the Titan last Sunday morning if they would have known that there was some issue with the vessel. They wouldn't have gotten on board if they knew that there was a problem. They wouldn't have gotten on board if they knew that the pressure would prove too much for the Titan. But there was issues they could not see. There was problems they couldn't identify. They couldn't see it on the surface. They couldn't see it when they first got into the water. They couldn't see it until they got to a certain depth and pressure was applied. I'm going to tell you, my brothers and sisters, as you go through life, you will experience pressure. You will experience pressure. Pressure is predictable, but my question to you today is your life built to withstand the pressure? Is your life built to withstand the pressure? Because pressure exposes problems. Pressure exposes problems. Pressure isn't the problem. Pressure reveals problems you couldn't see before the pressure came. Can I suggest to you that maybe your problem today is not the pressure that surrounds you, but the lack of peace within you? Maybe what's making you anxious, it's not your family. Maybe what's making you anxious is not the personal situation. Maybe it's not a financial circumstance. Maybe what has you anxious today, maybe what has you worried is not really the changes and turmoil in society. Maybe the problem isn't all of these things around you. Maybe all of these problems around you are actually exposing a problem in you. A problem maybe you haven't paid attention to when there was no pressure. A problem that was easy to overlook, problems that were easy to ignore when the pressure wasn't there. But see, things that we find easy to ignore, things that we find easy to overlook when there's no pressure, when pressure is applied, can become fatal. You know, we had a pandemic. Some of y'all remember that. A few years ago, we had a pandemic. And I'm going to tell you, it was a great revealer. It was a great revealer. The strength of businesses was revealed. We found out which businesses had enough cash on hand and which didn't. We found out which businesses could scale their operations and which could not. We found out which businesses were able to adapt and adjust and flex. And some businesses simply weren't prepared for that kind of pressure. Oh, we saw it in churches too. If people had weak reasons for attending before, if the ties that bind were already frayed and loose, they didn't come back. They were revealed to be more fans than followers. Oh, but churches too, we had our part in it. Those of us that lead, we were exposed. If we were weak on discipleship before, if we weren't growing passion for God in people before, if we were declining in terms of enthusiasm before, in terms of reaching unchurched people before, it accelerated. It didn't seem like an emergency before, but we weren't prepared for the pressure. And under the pressure, those problems became catastrophic failures. And some churches have shut their doors. Oh, but let me bring it home. Lean in. Let's talk about you for a minute. See, some people lost their ever-loving minds. Whether it was because of fear of the disease itself or others because of paranoia from government mandates or conspiracy theories. Oh, people went crazy and folks became more isolated and depressed. Friendships were destroyed. Family relationships were ripped apart. And we all thought that the problem was what was happening all around us. But can I suggest to you today that the real problem was what was in us, what was around us was simply revealing what we had not been paying attention to. See, it proved that many of us didn't have peace that could withstand pressure. And you didn't notice it when things were normal. You didn't notice it when things were just regular. This passage famously has that phrase, the peace that passes understanding. Peace that passes understanding. See, you don't need peace that passes understanding while your understanding can handle the pressure. No, it's only when my understanding can't grasp something. That's when I need peace to step in so I can handle the pressure of life. Well, the letter to the Philippians finds Paul under pressure. He is in prison. He is awaiting sentencing. He may even be sentenced to death. And yet Paul is unmoved. He's not shook. How does he do it? How do we do it? Paul says, here's how you do it. Here's how you stand up to pressure. Here's how you stand up to trials and problems. Here's how you deal with pressure in life. You have to learn to apply the big picture to little things. Learn to apply the big picture to little things. You've got to see the big picture and then bring it to bear on the ins and outs of everyday life. And by doing this, you're building in resistance. You're building in strength for when the pressure gets higher. He says, therefore, my brothers and sisters, stand firm. Stand firm. That word there, it means like a rock. So that the winds and the waves can pound against it, but it just doesn't move. Nothing happens to it. You know, we had this big storm. You see the trees out here damaged, and several of them are going to have to be cut down. But I do have a little bit of good news for you today. There was not a single rock that was damaged in that storm. There was not one rock that was damaged during that storm. They're all here. They're all accounted for. They're all doing just fine. And Paul is saying, that's what I want for you. I want you to be like a rock so that the storms of life can come and go, but you're unmoved. You're just fine. Stand firm in the Lord in this way. In what way? What way? Paul is pointing to himself and saying, I have a source of stability that's enabling me to deal with whatever pressure I may face. I have a source of stability. What's the source of your stability? What's the source of your stability? We all have sources that we look to for stability. Community, tradition, family. Whatever it is that gives you the answers to the big questions of life. It's the unthought thoughts. It's the things that you don't really think through on a day-to-day basis. They're the assumptions that you carry as you go through life that inform how you handle things, how you handle life. They're the deep truths down in the foundation of who you are. Just like a foundation, you don't really think about it. You don't really notice it until there's a problem. You don't have to think about it until there's a problem. And then we find out if the source of your stability is sufficient. See, we've all been shaped by family, by friends, by culture, by all kinds of sources that have shaped the truths that we rely on that make us stable in life, that make us move through life with confidence. What shaped you? What is shaping you? What's given you your approach to life? What's given you your approach to how you make decisions? Will it prove strong enough when the predictable pressure of life comes your way? See, your life has to be shaped to withstand pressure. It has to be shaped to withstand pressure. To be a person of great peace and stability in a very unstable world, you've got to have some disciplines of mind and heart. You're not going to get there by accident. You're not going to get there just with the passage of time. No, you have to actually think through the unthought thoughts. You actually have to think through the unthought thoughts, what it is that's informing your approach to life. What it is that's informing your approach to life. Paul always does this in his letters. He always begins with the indicative. We talked about this last week. The indicative and then the imperative. The indicative is, here's what's true. Here's what's real. Here's what's happened. The imperative is, so here's what you do about it. Here's what you, indicative before imperative. You establish the facts on the ground first. What's real? What's true? He says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever's true, whatever's noble, whatever's right, whatever's pure, whatever's lovely, whatever's admirable, think on these things. Think on these things. The word there is logizomai. It's an accounting term in the Greek. It means to add it up. It's like a clerk counting the cash in the drawer at the end of the day. That you've got to actually think through it. You've got to actually add it up, do the accounting, see what it all adds up to. And when he says whatever's true and whatever's noble, when he says that you think about these things, when he says all of this, he's not talking about just accentuating the positive in life. That's not what he's talking about. No, it's deeper than that. It's bigger than that. Paul is saying you need to take a serious accounting of what's most true, of what's right and pure at the deepest level. Paul is reminding them of a big truth. He wants them to come back to the big picture. The passage we read, it begins with, therefore. Rule number one of biblical interpretation. When you find therefore, ask what it's there for. Well, this one is referring to the previous two verses in chapter 3 that we didn't read, 3 verses 20 and 21. He says this, but our citizenship is in heaven. Our citizenship is in heaven, and we eagerly await a Savior from there, the Lord Jesus Christ, who by the power that enables him to bring everything under his control, will transform our lowly bodies so that they will be like his glorious body. Our citizenship is in heaven. Now we hear the word citizenship, and sometimes we think of maybe rights and responsibilities that go with being from where we're from, and that's good. But there's another implication here. Maybe we hear citizens of heaven, we think, well, yes, we're waiting to go there. Well, no, it actually means something more than that. The Philippians would have caught this immediately. They would have caught this immediately because Philippi was a Roman colony. Philippi was a Roman colony. It was established after the Roman Civil War that was sparked by the assassination of Julius Caesar, and there was a civil war between Mark Antony and Octavian, and Octavian won and becomes Caesar Augustus, and there was a large number of Roman troops that were stationed there in Philippi in what was now Greece, and the victorious Caesar Augustus decided, rather than bringing them back to Rome where people were already overcrowded and underemployed, it would be better to have them settle there in Philippi and make it a Roman colony. They were citizens of Rome, but their goal was not simply to return to Rome. No, their goal was to bring the culture and the order and the law of Rome to Philippi. When Paul says, "You're citizens of heaven," they knew just what he meant. Their job is not just to get to heaven someday, but rather to bring heaven to earth here and now, to bring the order of heaven to earth, to bring the beauty and the culture of the kingdom to bear in their worlds, in their circumstances, right there in Philippi. The Roman citizens there in Philippi, they understood that their Roman citizenship granted them a certain stability. It was a source of stability because they knew that if anything happened, if they ever ran into trouble, if they encountered any threat, they weren't on their own. They were Roman citizens. They had Rome to back them up. Paul is telling these Philippian believers that if you run into trouble, oh, you've got heaven backing you up. You're not on your own. You're not alone in this thing. You don't just have to figure it out. Well, I know what you're thinking, but you don't know what I'm going through. It's really bad. I've got a lot of things happening right now, and I don't know what I'm going to do about it. Well, what if those Roman colonists, what if they, in Philippi, what if they ran into big trouble? What if they ran into something they couldn't handle? What was the nuclear option? Well, the answer is Caesar himself. Caesar himself would come with his own forces and rescue them. Paul says, we eagerly await a Savior from there, from heaven, our Lord Jesus Christ. He's saying, this is how you stand firm. You need to know where your citizenship is from. You need to know who backs you up. That's what informs how you approach life. You need to know your purpose. You need to know what you're here for. That gives you an assurance that no matter what happens, I have all of heaven backing me up. And even if I run into big trouble, Jesus is coming. He is coming. So I can have stability within me no matter the instability that's surrounding me. I have a source of stability that can withstand the pressures of life. Paul is reminding the Philippian believers and us that the source of our stability, of our identity and our purpose has to do with the big picture. The big picture, what we've been adopted into, an identity, a security that we've been given. It's the great truth that's underneath everything. But then he takes that great big truth and he applies it to a little thing. He takes that big truth and applies it to a little thing. An argument between Euodia and Syntyche. These are two important women in the church. It's seemingly a small problem. We don't even know what the argument was about. Paul doesn't even take time to address the disagreement. And yet Paul knows, hey, small problems stack up after a while. You need to deal with it now while it's still small. I remember my mom growing up, she would not allow us to go to bed at night with dinner dishes still in the sink. We had to rinse our dishes, put them in the dishwasher. Eventually, when we got a dishwasher, we had to put them in the dishwasher. I know I'm old, but we had to put them in the dishwasher before we went to bed that night because what she didn't want to do was wake up to dishes in the sink and then have breakfast dishes on top of the dinner dishes, because she found that if you allowed the breakfast dinner dishes to go on top of the dinner dishes, you would feel overwhelmed by it when you got home in the evening and it was time to prepare the next meal. You got to take care of the little issues while they're still little. Paul is instructing them, don't let the little issues stack up on you. Deal with it now. But notice, Paul doesn't take a side here. He doesn't take a side here. He doesn't tell them the correct position to take, if there even was a correct position to take. Instead, he doesn't even say, you need to agree about this. You need to come to an agreement. You need to compromise. No, he doesn't say that. He says, tell them to be of the same mind in the Lord. Be of the same mind in the Lord. Remind them that they share a big picture. See, Paul understands that the only way that they could have gotten hung up on some petty, small issue is if they've lost sight of the big picture. He's saying, take that big picture. Take that big picture that you're citizens of heaven, that Jesus is coming, that your help is at hand. Take that and let it inform how you're dealing with this small issue over here. You will have a source of identity and significance and security. You have something that cannot be taken away from you. You have it in the Lord. See, if you don't understand that, if the source of your security and your significance and your identity, if it's in something that's too small to stand up to the pressures of life, you'll start feeling insecure when pressure starts coming around. You'll start feeling insecure. And the disagreement that you have with people over details, it'll make you defensive. You'll quickly lose sight of the big picture. If you lose sight of the big picture, you get defensive because you feel threatened. You feel insecure. And the thing about it is, insecure people can't afford to lose an argument. They can't lose an argument because it would just destroy them to be proven wrong. Insecure people, that they can't stand to be wrong because they're worried that it makes them look weak, and they already feel weak. See, they haven't dealt with the stuff that's inside. And so when the stuff that's outside comes at them, they don't have the resources to deal with it. You have to deal with the stuff that's inside. You've got to deal with the stuff that's inside, the stability and integrity of the interior. And it's really easy to ignore that most of the time. It's really easy to pay no attention to it. It's easy to look for the quick fix in life. It's easy to encounter situations, whether it's on your job or with your family. It's easy to encounter situations that bring pressure, and you just look for the quickest way out of it. That's why some folks just move from job to job to job, from church to church to church. They're trying to get out of it. They can't deal with it. They just want to get out of it quickly, or ignore it if you possibly can. Just ignore it until it gets out of hand and gets too big, or fight if you have to, but don't look inside. Don't look inside. Don't reflect on why you feel insecure. Oh no, don't do that. Don't slow down and take a look at why. Don't consider that maybe there's something going on the inside of you. Maybe there's some truth that you believe. Maybe there's something that you've looked to as a source of stability that is insufficient. And maybe the reason that this situation has you so upset, that it has you so stressed out, it might not be the situation itself. It might be a flaw in the design. It might be some weakness in the hull. What you've got is not suitable to the predictable pressure. Your unthought thoughts, those assumptions can't stand up to the pressure. The reason we lost so many trees in the storm is because several of them were already rotting from the inside. They were diseased. We just didn't see it before. When you go out, you can look where they broke apart, and you can see where they were splintered and rotting and dark inside. You could see where they were dying from the inside out. And yet, until the storm came, they looked fine. They looked all right. They looked okay until the wind started blowing. They looked okay until the storm came. But apply pressure, and things get exposed. Whatever's on the inside gets exposed. Whatever's going on the inside is going to determine how you make it through the storm. You need to think through the big picture and then apply it to the ins and outs of everyday life. It's like a stress test, so that you're building in strength. You're building in some resistance. You're building in some endurance. You need to look and see how the big picture, the big truth applies to the everyday aggravations. Learn to apply the big picture to the little things. You got to learn to encourage yourself. You need to learn to preach the gospel to yourself in the little issues, in the little things of life, so that when the predictable pressures come along, when the pressure goes up, you'll be able to stand firm. In this way, he says. You know, Paul isn't saying that, if you believe in Jesus, pressure won't come. No, it still comes. It comes for everyone. Paul knows this very well. He's sitting in a prison. See, it's not that what you're going through today isn't difficult. It's not that if you're facing something in your family or in your health, it's not that it's not difficult. I don't want to downplay that or minimize that. Not at all. It's not that what you're facing isn't bad. No, it is bad. But see, Paul wants the Philippians and for us to learn to decentralize what's stressing you out. Learn to decentralize what's stressing you out. We all have stressors in life. We all have things that come along that will stress us out. And the things that stress us out have a gravitational pull. Things that stress us out have a tendency to get to the center of your life until everything about you is revolving around whatever it is that has you stressed. You can't stop thinking about it. You can't stop talking about it. It's in the center of your life. How do I keep the things that stress me out from getting to the center? How do I decentralize what's stressing me out? Paul gives us 2 practices that keep stress out of the center, that keep stressors in their proper place, that keep the pressure on the outside. You got to celebrate what's constant and pray about what's passing. Celebrate what's constant, pray about what's passing. See, if you're going to decentralize what's stressing you out, you've got to have something bigger. You've got to have something with a stronger gravitational force at the center. You need something that can't be displaced, that cannot be moved, that cannot be shaken. You've got to have something that's bigger than what's stressing you out. It'll keep what's stressing you out in its proper place. You start by celebrating what's constant. Celebrate what's constant. Celebrate that constant in the center. He says, rejoice in the Lord always. Rejoice. It's not the best. Maybe it would be better translated celebrate, because he's not talking about an internal feeling here. He's not talking about a feeling of general happiness that you have. No, he's talking about an outward celebration. Now, I know we got a lot of people at Resurrection Church that come from a lot of different places and a lot of different church traditions, and some from no tradition at all. And maybe you're not used to it when we say clap your hands or shout or lift your hands. It's not hype. It's not. We're not just trying to hype you up. No, we're trying to teach you to celebrate. We're trying to teach you how to celebrate. Celebrations are important. Celebrations matter. The Roman world, they knew it. They knew it. They had lots of celebrations. They had lots of holidays. They had a lot more than we do. And they were not just occasions for mere frivolity. All of those holidays, all of those celebrations, they actually served a practical purpose. They served a practical purpose. Those celebrations reminded them of their identity as Roman citizens. It reminded them of their privilege as Roman citizens. It reminded them of the stability of Caesar as their leader. It reminded them of their security that they enjoyed. Those celebrations strengthened their ties to one another and to Caesar, and it built culture. So they would celebrate often. And Paul says, this is what I need you to do. If they can celebrate Caesar, we should celebrate King Jesus. We should celebrate Jesus. You need to learn sometimes how to stop and celebrate in the Lord. I remember my grandparents growing up, my dad's parents, they're just good old Pentecostal holiness people. And we'd be over at their house visiting, and it would be, my grandmother would be in the kitchen preparing lunch. My grandfather would just be walking through the house doing Lord knows what. And then suddenly one of them would just start clapping. Well, thank you, Lord. I'm like, well, for what? What happened? I don't, just randomly, no, they had learned how to stop and celebrate. They had learned how to encourage themselves. See, you've got to learn to stop and celebrate. That you have an identity that can't be taken away. You have a security that can't be taken away. You've got something down on the inside that keeps you from being shook when life wants to shake you up. Rejoice in the Lord always. Celebrate in the Lord, and do it always. Always, he says. So when things are good, I don't rejoice in the good things. Oh, they're good. I'm glad they're there. But I rejoice in the Lord. So that way when things are bad, it doesn't stop my joy. I still rejoice in the Lord. I have something that's constant. I have a constant source of joy, unstoppable joy. That means I can ride through the storms of life When the waves come against me and the wind blows, when the ups and downs come along, I'm safe in Him. I'm all right in Him. I have something that's constant that keeps me in the right place. I'm stable. I'm protected from the pressure. And then he says this is a funny little sentence. Let your gentleness be evident to all. It's kind of a weird word to translate. Epiekes is the word in Greek. Gentleness might not be the best word, but it's not their fault. There's not a great way to translate it. It's a rich word. It means something to the effect of have a radical evenness of temper. Have a radical evenness of temper so that your highs aren't so high and your lows aren't so low. So that you can bear the bad things that come along and you can deal with it when good things disappear. The lows aren't so low, the highs aren't so high, because the main thing can't ever be touched. The main thing can't be touched by success or failure. So when things are good, that's good. I don't get too excited about that, though. I have a constant source of celebration. So when things are bad, that's bad, but I don't get too sad about it. I have an evenness of temperature. I have something that is constant. I have something that's unaffected by the vicissitudes of life. I celebrate to remind myself of that. I celebrate to center my mind and my thinking and my emotions on that. I celebrate to decentralize the stuff that stresses me out. And look, he says, let it be evident to all, until it becomes evident to the people around me. You've got something. How come you're not up and down like everybody else? How come you don't freak out like everybody else? I've got something that can't be moved on the inside. Well, that's the first practice. Celebrate what's constant. Here's the second one. Pray about what's passing. Pray about what's passing. See, this celebration, it's not just some Pollyanna unreality, not being willing to face the facts. No, there are real things that happen to us in life. There are real problems that come up in life. There are real pressures in life. There are things that come into our lives that could make us anxious. That's why he says, do not be anxious about anything. Paul wouldn't bother saying, do not be anxious, if there weren't some things that could come along that would make you anxious. He says, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, present your request to God. He says, don't be anxious about anything, but rather in everything, make your request made known to God. So instead of dwelling on it, instead of worrying about it, instead of trying to figure it out, instead of analyzing it, instead of pontificating about it, instead of talking with my cousin about it, instead of dealing with it with everybody else, pray about it instead. Pray about it instead. Stop worrying about it and start praying about it. Now, I mean, it seems simple enough. It seems simple enough. You say, I know that you were going to say that, but you don't understand the way I feel. You don't understand what I'm going through. Well, first of all, prayer is something, prayer reminds you that whatever it is you're dealing with, it's passing. It brings you back and it recenters you. It decenters what's stressing you out. It reminds you that whatever you're dealing with, no matter how bad it is passing. It is a passing thing. It's something that's ultimately going away. It's something that it cannot just stay like this forever. Paul says, don't be anxious. Don't be anxious. What he means is not, you shouldn't ever think about that or you shouldn't have a concern. No, it means to have distracting care. It's one thing to have something going on that you care about. It's another thing when it's distracting you, when you can't think about anything else, when you can't sleep at night, when you can't have conversations about anything else. It's always pulling your mind away. It's become a preoccupation for you. It's at the center. And I know our first instinct in life, it seems simple. Don't worry about it, pray about it. Don't be anxious about it, pray about it. I know it seems simple, but see, our first instinct is to get anxious. The first instinct is to worry about it. The first instinct is to react defensively. The first instinct is to stress out, freak out, let them have it. See, I remember when I was in elementary school, They would have these safety presentations once in a while, and they came through and they told us something, and they told us this again and again. They even had a little rhyme for it to help us remember. They said, if you should ever find yourself on fire, if you ever catch on fire, what you need to do is you need to stop, drop, and y'all went to the same elementary school I did. Stop, drop, and roll. But see, that would not be my first instinct if I was on fire. That is not my first instinct if I was on fire. My first instinct is if I'm on fire is scream, run, look for water. No, how can you have the presence of mind not to go with your first instinct? How can you have the presence of mind not to get anxious about things? How can we learn not to react? You've got to practice. You've got to rehearse that truth. That's what prayer is doing. It's rehearsing the great truths of God. We grind that formula down into our youngsters. Stop, drop, and roll. Prayer is grinding three fundamental truths about God down into your spirit so that you learn not to go with your first response. He says instead of being anxious, pray about it. Here's why you pray about it. First thing is, God cares. God cares. If you know that, then you can bring everything to Him in prayer. Paul says, in every situation, you can make your request made known to God. It doesn't have to reach a certain threshold of emergency before you bring it to God. It doesn't have to be something that anybody else thinks is serious. If other people try to minimize it, you can still pray about it. The old hymn said, oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear, all because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. If it's important to you, it's important to God. If it's important to you, it's important to God because He cares for you. He cares about what you're going through. That means you can ask God for anything and know that He cares. But a second truth that prayer rehearses is that God is able. See, it's good to have someone who cares, but to have somebody who's able. See, some people are able to help me. They just don't care. But see, I have a lot of people in my life that are wonderful people, and they really do care. They just aren't able. I'd help you if I could, Pastor. Hey, if I could do it, if I had it, I'd write you a check for it right now. If I could do it, I'd do it. If I could help you, I'd help you. I have friends, I have family that they would love to step in and help sometimes when I've needed help. They just weren't able. They just couldn't do it. They didn't have the resources to do it. We serve a God that has the resources to handle anything that you face in life. It doesn't matter how big it is. It doesn't matter how impossible it seems. Jesus said, you have not because you ask not. And you ask not because you either don't believe He cares or you don't believe He's able. That's the only reason that you would ask not. We demonstrate our trust in God's care and God's ability when we bring everything, every situation before Him in prayer. But see, here's the thing. Most of us believe that God cares. Most of us in here believe that God cares. Most of us in here believe that God is able. But you know what? You'll still give in to anxiety if you don't trust that God is wise. Not only does He care, not only is He able, He's wise. Look what Paul says. In every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, make your request made known to God. With thanksgiving. How can I do it with thanksgiving? How can I be thankful when I don't yet know how it's going to work out? How can I be thankful when I don't know how it's going to turn out, when I don't know what's going to happen with it? Well, you have to trust the wisdom of God. You have to trust that He knows what He's doing. See, we know that you trust in the wisdom of God, not just that you pray, but how you pray. Do you pray with thanksgiving? You can only pray with thanksgiving if you know that God is wise. See, sometimes God will answer our prayers yes. Sometimes God answers our prayers no. Sometimes God answers our prayers not yet. But here's the thing. There's no answer to prayer that God gives that's not ultimately for your good. There is no prayer that God gives that's ultimately not ultimately for your good. See, when we choose anxiety, when we choose worry, what we're saying is essentially God is a bad God if he doesn't do what I want him to do. God is a bad God if he doesn't do what I think needs to be done. Or maybe God doesn't even exist if he's not doing what I think he should do. But see, that doesn't even make any sense. If there is a real God, if God is God, he's a real God who knows everything, then that means that by necessarily there's going to be times that I'm not going to understand what he's doing. There's going to be times that I'm not going to understand everything. That I'm not going to know what's going on. I'm not going to be able to explain why all the time. It's proof that I'm dealing with a real God, with a living God, is the fact that I don't understand everything. I don't know all the time. And it's in those times that I have to trust that he's wise, that he knows better, not to lean on my own perspective, on my own ability to understand and decipher situations and problems and people. You know, we tell our kids no sometimes. We tell, if you have kids, you tell them no sometimes. And when they're little especially, it doesn't really matter if you explain it to them. They're not going to understand it. They're not going to receive it. And so sometimes you just say no, and there's not really an explanation there. Jesus said this. He said, unless you become like a little child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. Unless you become like a little child. I thought about this week. I think everybody's like a child. You're either childlike or childish. You're either childlike and trust that he knows better than you do, or you're childish and you throw temper tantrums when things don't go your way. You can't enter the kingdom unless you're childlike, not childish. You've got to trust that he's wise, that he knows what he's doing, so that as you pray, you can say, God, I thank you. I don't know what you're doing right now, or how that this could possibly be good, or how this could possibly turn out, but I'm going to trust that you're doing something, and I trust that you're working for my good, and that you're going to bring good out of it. So you thank him for whatever it is that he chooses to do, because I know that ultimately it's going to be for me. Ultimately, it's going to be for good. See, this is how you overcome anxiety. This is how you overcome worry. It's saying, I don't have to be in control of everything. I don't have to understand everything. It's saying, I give up the right to my own opinion about exactly how everything is supposed to go. Maybe I don't know what's best. In fact, probably I don't know what's best. So God, whatever you choose to do, however you choose to do it, any way you bless me, I'll be satisfied. You know better than I do. You know more than I do. So I'll trust your wisdom. I'll go ahead and just thank you in advance. And here's the result. You'll have peace under pressure. You'll have peace that can withstand any pressure that you face. Look here in verse 7. I'm almost finished. And the peace of God that transcends all understanding will guard your heart and your mind. The peace of God will guard your heart and your mind. The peace of God marches around your heart and marches around your mind. So your heart might be breaking, but he's holding you together. He's marching around you, keeping you up and propping you up until you can get it back together. You're not going to lose your mind. You're not going to have a nervous breakdown. The peace of God is marching guard around your heart and around your mind. I found out something interesting this week. When it says guarding your heart and mind. Guards in the ancient world, they had a particular function. We just think about maybe police patrolling up and down the streets, but this was different. In the ancient world, they had walled cities. They had walled cities to protect against invading forces and marauders and people who would come in and do damage to the city. And they would have these walled cities. The wall would surround the city, and up on top of the wall, they would place guards on top of the wall that would walk around the city, looking out for any threat, looking out for any problem, looking out for anything that was going to come in. They were looking out for those invading forces. But I learned this week, they had a secondary function too. They had a secondary function as well. Because see, when a city came under attack, when a city was under siege, when things got hard, When the pressure went up, there were some people sometimes who would get discouraged, they would lose hope, and they would want to give up, and they would want to go out, and they'd want to surrender and just defect on to the other side. And that guard, not only was their job to keep the invading forces out, their other job was to keep the citizens in. Their job wasn't just to keep the wrong stuff out. Their job was also to keep the right stuff in. He says the peace of God will guard your heart and mind. That means he's working to keep the wrong stuff out and the right stuff in. So he keeps anxiety out and he keeps joy in. He keeps the frustration out. He keeps the faith in. He keeps the worry out. He keeps the strength in. He keeps depression out. He keeps love in. He keeps despair out. He keeps hope in. When the pressure is high, the pressure stays out, but the peace stays in. I've got peace under pressure. As you do this, as you learn to apply the big picture to the little things, as you learn to decentralize what's stressing you out, you'll find the peace of God is yours. He closes with this little exhortation here in verse 9. He says, and the God of peace will be with you. The God of peace will be with you. It's a nice symmetry here. On the one hand, the peace of God is guarding your heart and mind. But then over here, the God of peace is with you. How do you get the peace of God? Seek the God of peace. See, you'll have the peace of God because the God of peace is with you. You can have peace under pressure when you know the God of peace. When you know that his presence is with you, providing peace that surrounds you in every circumstance, that's keeping the pressure out. You can have peace within.